Paddy Pimblett manages to draw a ton of spectators in to watch him fight. However, with that level of fame, he manages to get his fair share of criticism as well. That's why Matt Brown, when talking about how Pimblett would fare against higher ranked competition, said that he wouldn't do too well. Stick around to the end of the video to find out more. First up, why would Matt Brown say such a thing? Paddy Pimblett may be crushing it in the UFC right now. However, we fear that his showboating might outweigh his actual skill to compete. In easier words, he might just be a loudmouth who doesn't have the skills to back up all of his trash talk. As it turns out, we're not the only ones who feel this way. Matt Brown, a UFC fighter from the welterweight division, seems to share our opinion. If he believes that Pimblett were to start facing fighters who held a high rank in his division, he wouldn't be able to win the fight no matter what he did. Now, keep in mind, we're not just trash talking Paddy here without any substantial proof. His recent fight with Jared Gordon is one of the best examples of what we're talking about. It was UFC 282, and the 27-year-old British fighter faced off against Gordon in a co-main event. It's safe to say that things did not go his way, and the fact that he managed to pull off a win is a controversy in itself. The fact that the judges awarded Pimblett the decision as opposed to Gordon has sparked a ton of protest over the decision online. A lot of people are calling the UFC out and are talking about how, from what they can tell, the fight was rigged in Pimblett's favor. After seeing the fight for ourselves, I mean, we couldn't agree more. Next up, what exactly did Brown say? Matt Brown had a lot to say when it came to Paddy Pimblett. He started by talking about how he knew that one way or another, Paddy was going to be the one coming out with a win in this bout. And after seeing what happened on Saturday, he said that it wasn't the least bit shocking to him. So, on the latest episode of The Fighter vs. The Writer, Matt Brown went ahead and talked about how, from what he could tell, Paddy needed to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate himself. He believes that there are a lot of things lacking in Pimblett's game and that he needs to address these problems immediately. He even talked about Pimblett having to head back to Cage Warriors again and starting from the bottom. According to him, while he's in the big leagues now, his skill set just isn't what it takes to stay afloat in a situation such as this. He believes that the UFC won't make him fight against a tough opponent anytime soon. That's because, like Paddy, they're riding the hype train as well. So it wouldn't exactly be good for business if their star man suddenly started losing almost every fight he steps into the octagon for. We're not gonna lie, we feel like Brown might be onto something here, as until Gordon, Paddy hasn't been able to face anyone notable. Coming up, what problems did Paddy face in his recent fight? Alright, now let's take a look at some of the core issues we noticed Pimblett had while fighting against Jared Gordon. It's safe to say that if Pimblett doesn't address these issues before his next fight, we don't think he'd be coming out of the octagon with a win. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing that we noticed Paddy was struggling with was that he had a terrible defense. Well, in other words, Gordon's offense was a little too much for Pimblett to be able to cope with. It seemed like for half of the fight, Pimblett was blocking Gordon's punches with his face as opposed to using his hands for defense. However, even after facing issues such as these, Pimblett still held a firm belief that he'd managed to win the fight fair and square. In fact, during his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, he went on to state that he believed he managed to win all 3 rounds. We don't know what he's talking about if we're being honest. Maybe once he rewatches the fight, he'll be able to figure out what happened. It's either that or Paddy is truly delusional and holds himself in such high regard that he doesn't believe that he can have a bad performance. The man dared to talk about how he should have won all 3 rounds. Finally, what was Matt Brown's overall opinion of Paddy? Matt Brown didn't just stop talking about all the stuff Paddy was missing in his arsenal. He went on to talk about how, in his opinion, Pimblett treated himself as more of a social media performer as opposed to being a real fighter. He also mentioned how the fighter didn't spend as much effort on his training as he did on his YouTube videos. What's more, Brown believes that this whole persona that Paddy has built up about being such a loudmouth is all part of his strategy to gain even more fame. However, he also mentioned how he believes that unless Paddy takes the time out to study his own game and figure out where he can improve as a fighter, that strategy might end up backfiring. He also talked about how Paddy can't admit that he lost that fight because if he does, it puts him in an even worse position than before. Thanks to this controversy, he's got more people talking about him than ever. Now, let's take a look at how the judge who scored Pimblett's fighting is faring. First up, what's happening with Doug Crosby? Doug Crosby hasn't been having the best weekend as of late, as he's come under fire for messing up not one, but 2 scorecards. That, ladies and gentlemen, isn't even the whole thing. As it turns out, he somehow managed to screw over 2 different organizations, one being the UFC and the other being Bellator. Now, we're sure you guys know all about the colossal mess up Crosby managed to orchestrate in the UFC. So with that being said, we thought it was fitting for us to dive into the Bellator controversy. Crosby somehow managed to score the fight between Sabateo and Stotts a 50-45 score in favor of Sabateo. He managed to make history as his scorecard was the first ever 50-45 scorecard for a losing fighter. The other judges present at the event were Eric Collin and Brian Miner, who scored the fight 48-47 in favor of Stotts. This allowed Stotts to win the whole thing via a split decision. We think it's safe to say that the state commission wasn't impressed with Crosby's actions. Next up, what did the athletic commission have to say? Mike Mazzulli, who is the Mohegan Athletic Department's director of athletics, had a few things to say about Crosby's ability to judge bouts. He talked about how absurd it was that Crosby had scored the fight in favor of Sabateo, winning all 5 rounds. As we said, history was made that night. Sabateo is the first fighter in the history of the sport who managed to win all 5 rounds for one judge and lose for the other 2. He went on to talk about how this decision was very controversial on Crosby's part and that the athletics department was taking this very seriously. He also mentioned how when the department had been faced with such issues in the past, they'd gone ahead and sanctioned such officials and had not released the information to the public. What's more, he also added that Crosby's actions were nothing less than jarring, and he'd never seen this level of controversy over a judge before. That too, in more than one organization. He said that the athletics department wasn't one to slack off in this regard and was famous for sanctioning such officials who weren't performing up to par. Coming up, what exactly did Crosby do? Now that we've covered the Sabateo vs Stotts fight, we think we should look over the Pimblett vs Gordon fight one more time. It feels like Crosby slept through the actual fight and instead dreamt up a completely different bout because his scorecard at the end was nothing short of a wonder. Crosby ended up scoring the actual fight 29-28 in favor of Paddy the Baddy, even though 23 of the 24 media outlets provide the UFC 282 results scored the fight in favor of Gordon. Another person who turned in a wrong scorecard was Ron McCarthy, who's the son of the legendary UFC referee Big John McCarthy. The fact that Crosby was able to make 2 big mess ups such as these happen in such a small period shows how underqualified he is to be judging at such important and big events. It's incidents like these that people keep pulling up over and over, and really the only damage that ends up happening is the damage done to a fighter's credibility. Finally, is the athletic commission going to take any action? The big question. The one thing that's on everyone's minds is whether the athletic commission will ever end up taking any action against Doug Crosby. Well, it's safe to say, judging by their track record, the Nevada Athletic Commission will probably do nothing, and Pimblett will manage to escape the whole thing unscathed, alongside Doug Crosby. One thing's for sure, no big fight promotion is going to be having Crosby sitting at their judging table anytime soon. Who knows, we might never have to see him again. After looking at the state of things in the industry right now, there's not much anybody can do. MMA judging continues to be a hot topic for almost every fan of the sport. We guess it's sad that the relevant authorities don't seem the least bit interested in changing the system or bringing about change for the better. Until someone decides to step up and point out these problems, nothing will change. Although, simply pointing out the problems won't be enough. They're going to have to actively work on bringing about a positive change as well. Well, that's a wrap for this video. Do you think Pimblett can survive against tougher opponents? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you at the next one.